My name is David. Before I tell you what happened, tell me one thing. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone, and thank you for being here on Revenge Depth, the place where we dig into the stories that cut deepest, where trust is tested and truth fights back. This is not a tale you hear every day. It's not gossip or a bedtime tale. It's my life, a life I built with my hands and my back, and the story of how the people I loved most tried to take it all away. My wife died when Isabella was only 12. Grief layered itself over our small house and over my shoulders in a way I didn't think I could bear. But there's a strange, stubborn muscle in a father's heart. I kept moving. I worked double shifts at the plant, came home and fixed dinner, helped with homework, sat up nights when she had fevers. I wanted her to feel safe, to never know the empty place I carried. When other men my age were thinking about sitting down, I kept working so she could have a future. Years of thrift and sacrifice eventually paid for this house, the one with the crooked porch and the roses I planted with my wife's name in my head. The mortgage dragged me for a long time, but I paid it brick by brick. When Isabella graduated and moved into adulthood, holding that house key felt like a promise. She will always have a home. That was my dream. People told me she'd change, that teenagers grow up and drift. I accepted that. But change is one thing. Cold detachment is another. At first it was small, skipped calls, plans cancelled because work came up. Then the warmth in her voice, the way she used to look at me after a long day, faded into impatience and excuses. She laughed more at her phone than at my jokes. She began answering me with one-word replies. I thought maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe I was the old man out of step. I wanted to believe the best. Then I met George. Jack used to be my brother. No, that's not right. George is my brother. He came back into our lives with a slick smile and a suit that cost more than I make in a month. He charmed neighbors. He charmed colleagues. He was always the man with a plan. He made everything sound like a grand idea. He hugged Isabella at family dinners, bought her gifts, and always had a camera-ready line about family loyalty. I welcomed him in. I let him be what everyone wanted him to be, the successful, generous uncle. What I didn't see was how his appetite grew. The first missing bill didn't make sense. A small transfer here, an odd merchant charge there. Mistakes, I thought. But mistakes don't add up into a pattern. They don't turn into months of unexplained withdrawals and accounts I once controlled being shifted into other names. When I asked George about it, he clapped the back of my chair and said, in that easy voice he used for neighbors, "It's nothing, David. Numbers get messy. You worry too much." The real blow came the night I overheard them. I was heading to the kitchen for water and paused outside Isabella's room because voices drifted down the hall. My name was mentioned, quiet and bitter. "I wish he would just move out," Isabella said. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with something colder. Relief, almost. "He's old. This house should be ours. We could start fresh." "Don't worry," George replied smoothly. "I'll handle it. He won't know what hit him. We'll get it sorted, and then it'll all be easy." Those words hit me like a falling tile. The house, every board and nail, felt suddenly foreign. The picture frames on the mantel, the toys stashed in the attic, the smell of my wife's perfume pressed into an old shawl, all of it weighted with a betrayal I hadn't imagined. I could have burst in, revealed myself, demanded answers. I could have confronted them both on the spot, but I didn't. I stayed in the doorway like a ghost, listening to the plotting of the people I loved most. The silence, after their voices stopped, was louder than any argument. It told me everything I needed to know. How does a father respond when the child he raised decides his life is expendable? How does a man respond when his own brother wears a mask so well his nephew and neighbors clap for him? There are 1,000 ways to react. Anger, pleading, tears. I felt them all. But there was one feeling that grew and refused to be quieted. Resolve. That night I sat on the back steps, the cold seeping through my jeans, and I counted the cost of every kindness I had given. I thought of the nights I'd worked through sickness, the lunches I'd skipped, the dentures I'd saved for. The list went on and it hardened me like armor. Isabella had a right to grow and make her life. But to plot my removal, to trade my home for convenience, that crossed a line I would not accept. So I made a choice. Not a scream or a wild confrontation, but a plan. Betrayal had turned my home into contested ground, and I would not lose it without knowing everything, every bank transfer, every whispered call, every paper signed under another name. I would find out how deep George had dug his claws, and when the time was right, I would make sure he paid for every centimeter of that wound. This is where it begins. I don't know yet how far I'll go or what it will cost, but I know this. When family betrayal strikes, the fallout never leaves the same people it started with. That night, sleep was impossible. My mind replayed Isabella's words again and again, as if each syllable carved itself deeper into my chest. This house should be ours. The sentence cut sharper than any knife. I'd spent years convincing myself that the sacrifices I made were worth it, that she would one day look back and understand the weight I carried for her. But instead, she was plotting with George, my own brother. At dawn, I rose from bed with a heavy head. I brewed coffee, sat by the kitchen table, and stared at the morning light breaking through the blinds. This wasn't just betrayal, it was strategy. They had been planning behind my back, moving pieces like players on a chessboard, waiting for the moment to corner the king. And I was their king. I needed answers. I went through my desk drawers, where I kept old bills and receipts. Something didn't add up. The property tax statement was missing. The last mortgage letter, too. At first, I thought maybe I had misplaced them. But when I called the bank, the voice on the other end tightened something inside me. "Sir," the woman said, "according to our records, the ownership details on this property have recently been updated." My stomach clenched. "Updated? What do you mean updated?" "There's been a transfer request. It seems your brother, George Miller, has partial authority on the account now." I froze. My brother had somehow gained access to documents that were mine alone. How my mind raced through every memory. Then it struck me. Isabella. She must have given him what he needed. She knew where I kept my papers. She had my trust. The betrayal wasn't only emotional. It was legal. I didn't argue with the woman on the phone. Instead, I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence. My hands shook, but not from weakness, from rage. Later that evening, Isabella came home. She was dressed well, hair done up like she'd been out with friends. She didn't even look at me when she entered, just mumbled, "Hey, Dad," and went straight to her room. My instinct told me to storm in and confront her. But instead, I waited. I needed proof, undeniable proof. Over the next few days, I became an investigator in my own house. I checked drawers when she was gone, found envelopes that weren't addressed to me, contracts tucked beneath her notebooks. My suspicion grew heavier when I found one document that made my blood run cold. A draft agreement, transferring full ownership of the house to George, signed only by Isabella's hand at the bottom. My daughter had already tried to forge my name. Every evening, George visited. His car pulled into the driveway like clockwork. I stayed out of sight, listening as their voices carried through the thin walls. "Don't worry, Bella," George said one night, his tone oily smooth. "He's too old-fashioned to notice. Just a few more steps and it's done. We'll list the property, and the buyers won't care who lived here before. Are you sure he won't find out?" Isabella's voice trembled, but not from guilt, from fear of being caught. "He won't," George reassured. "And even if he does, it'll be too late. The papers are in motion." Those words sealed their fate in my eyes. My own daughter, plotting my erasure. My own brother, smiling as he stole the ground beneath my feet. They thought I was blind. They thought I was weak. They had mistaken silence for surrender. That night, as they laughed in the living room, I slipped out quietly into the backyard. The roses I had planted with my wife swayed in the cool wind. I crouched down, touched the soil, and whispered her name under my breath. "I won't let them take this from us." I had given George and Isabella enough rope, and they had wrapped it around their own necks. Now it was my turn to pull. My plan began with gathering every document, every shred of evidence I could find. I copied bank statements, photographed the forged contract, and recorded their conversations on my phone. It wasn't enough to confront them emotionally. I needed to strike with precision, and while they were busy thinking they had won, I prepared the move they would never expect. The next morning, the house felt heavier, as if every wall was holding its breath. Each creak of the floorboards and every soft rustle of the wind reminded me of the conversations I had overheard. I couldn't sit still. I moved from room to room like a man possessed, notebook in hand, cataloging every oddity from the past few weeks. The missing bills, the odd merchant charges, George's smooth explanations, and Isabella's sudden fascination with expensive gadgets and clothes. Patterns emerged like an unwelcome map, pointing straight to the truth. Betrayal had taken root in my home. I knew intuition wasn't enough. I needed hard evidence, but moving too quickly would alert them. George was cunning. Any mistake on my part could tip him off. I had to be meticulous. Every call I answered, every bank statement I examined, every question I asked was calculated. That afternoon, I called the bank again, disguising my concern with casual curiosity. My hands shook as I asked detailed questions about recent transfers. And then it hit me. $50,000 had been quietly moved from my account. A transaction of such magnitude had slipped past me, masked as routine payments. My stomach twisted in rage. George had siphoned almost 50 grand, likely funding Isabella's indulgences, expensive clothes, jewelry, gadgets, all bought with the money I had painstakingly saved over decades. I sank into the chair, phone in hand, staring at the numbers over and over. Betrayal had a new, heavier face. Not just emotional, but tangible. They hadn't just planned to take my home. They were quietly stealing from me. From the account that was mine alone, they had dared to take $50,000. That night, George arrived at the house, his polished shoes tapping confidently on the porch. Isabella followed, a sly grin plastered across her face. I stayed hidden, notebook ready, phone recording, heart pounding. Every word, every laugh, every casual remark was a trap laid by them, and I intended to turn it back around. I got the transaction approved, George said smoothly, leaning back in the armchair. The money is gone, Bella, just as we planned. Isabella's eyes sparkled with glee. He'll never notice until it's too late, she whispered. I pressed the phone closer to my chest. Every movement they made, every secretive word, was now proof. The $50,000 transfer was the tangible evidence I needed to expose both of them. My daughter plotting against me, my brother executing the plan. They thought I was blind, weak, and inattentive. But patience and observation were my allies, and the scales were about to tip. Over the next few days, I meticulously cross-checked bank statements, receipts, and contracts. I photographed every page, every forged signature, every proof of their collaboration. The $50,000 transaction became the cornerstone of my plan. Not just numbers on a statement, but a symbol of the betrayal I had endured for too long. On the fourth night, I set a small trap. A decoy document, highlighting the movement of funds, was left deliberately where George would find it. I stayed back, pretending to read in the living room, phone recording the scene. Predictably, he rifled through the papers, muttering under his breath about how easy it was. Isabella hovered, anxious yet thrilled. Every gesture, every glance was captured. By the end of the evening, I had undeniable proof of their collusion. George and Isabella had assumed I was weak. They had thought silence meant surrender. But I had been patient, and the $50,000 theft had given me the leverage I needed. That night I barely slept, my mind running through the confrontation I would orchestrate. It would not be rash or emotional, it would be precise. Every forged signature, every transfer, every whisper had been catalogued. Every move they made had been anticipated. They were about to learn that patience, when combined with preparation, is a weapon more deadly than anger. The house, once a place of solace, now hummed with tension. Betrayal had struck deep, but it had also awakened a quiet, unyielding resolve inside me. And resolve, once it takes hold, does not falter. Tomorrow the first move would be made. George and Isabella would finally learn that the man they plotted against had seen every step, anticipated every move, and was ready to make them pay, in more ways than one. The morning sunlight barely penetrated the blinds, but it didn't matter. Sleep had long abandoned me. Every thought circling in my head returned to that $50,000 transfer, to Isabella's sly smile, to George's calculated confidence. The house no longer felt like mine. Every room whispered betrayal. Every object, the old sofa, the kitchen table, even the roses in the backyard, seemed tainted by deceit. I needed a plan that was precise, surgical, and utterly untraceable. Emotion alone would not win this battle. They had underestimated me, assuming my silence meant weakness. They didn't know that patience, observation, and meticulous recording could be more devastating than any outburst. By late morning, I sat at the dining table, laptop open, spreadsheets, scanned contracts and photographs spread before me. Every transaction linked, every signature cross-referenced, every conversation documented. The $50,000 theft had been just the tip of the iceberg. There were smaller transfers, hidden charges, and suspicious vendor payments George had orchestrated to fund Isabella's lavish lifestyle. I leaned back and let out a slow breath. The first step was clear. I had to confront them indirectly. A direct confrontation would alert George and push Isabella into hiding or manipulation. No, the advantage had to remain with me. Evidence first, confrontation later. That evening, George arrived punctually, carrying his briefcase like an armor of false confidence. Isabella trailed behind, her laughter light but forced. I pretended to be absorbed in paperwork, glancing at them only briefly from the corner of my eye. They had no idea I was watching, recording, planning. "Everything is on track," George said, his tone too smooth to be genuine. "Soon, the house and the funds will be ours. He won't suspect a thing." Isabella's grin widened, her eyes alight with excitement. "It's working perfectly. Dad has no idea." I clicked the recording app on my phone, capturing every word. Every glance they exchanged was catalogued. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was tangible, and I now had proof of both intent and action, thanks to that $50,000 transfer. After they left, I reviewed everything. Photos of the forged documents, screenshots of transactions, recordings of whispered plans. It was enough to ruin them legally, socially, and emotionally. But I didn't want revenge to be a chaotic explosion. I wanted it meticulous, undeniable, and unforgettable. Late at night, I found myself standing in the backyard, staring at the roses I had planted with my wife's memory in mind. I whispered to the cool wind, "This ends soon. Justice isn't gone. It's waiting." The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also sharpened my focus. Over the next few days, I refined my strategy. I created multiple backups of all documents, organized the evidence in a way that even a casual observer would understand the extent of George and Isabella's conspiracy. I even planned a subtle leak, information that would unsettle them, make them question each other, sow distrust in their alliance. They thought they were untouchable, but every move they made had been watched, recorded, and catalogued. One night, as I reviewed the evidence again, my phone buzzed with a notification. A new charge on the account. I froze. Another $2,000 withdrawal. Sneaky, almost invisible, yet connected to Isabella's account. My jaw tightened. They were brazen, overconfident, perfect. This only confirmed what I had suspected. They had underestimated me completely. The plan was set. Step 1. Ensure the money was traced and accounted for. Step 2. Ensure George and Isabella knew I had eyes everywhere. Step 3. Force the confrontation on my terms. Every late-night observation, every document photographed, every whispered plan I had recorded. It was all now part of a larger design. As I finally went to bed, the weight on my shoulders had shifted. No longer merely a victim, I had become an observer, a planner, a strategist. The house might still seem theirs in appearances, but the power had quietly returned to me. The $50,000 betrayal was no longer just a wound. It was the key to their unraveling. Tomorrow, the first step of retribution would begin. George and Isabella believed they were untouchable, that my patience meant passivity. They were wrong, very wrong. And for the first time in weeks, I slept with a sense of grim anticipation, the calm before the storm I had so carefully crafted. The morning arrived with an unusual calm, the kind that feels heavier than storms. I sat at the dining table, reviewing the mountain of evidence I had collected. Photos of forged documents, screenshots of bank transactions, recordings of whispered plans, and of course, the damning $50,000 transfer. Each piece told the same story: betrayal, greed, and manipulation. I knew the first move had to be subtle yet powerful, not a confrontation in anger, but a strike that would leave George and Isabella questioning everything they thought they controlled. The plan was simple in theory: use their overconfidence against them, expose their scheme in a way that was undeniable, and reclaim both justice and the house. By noon, Isabella left for a friend's outing, her confidence still intact. George stayed behind, reviewing some financial reports on his laptop, oblivious to the storm about to hit. I moved quickly, quietly. My first target: the bank records and the forged transfer documents. I made copies, encrypted files, and drafted a concise summary showing every fraudulent move, every secret transaction, every illegal signature. Then I took the boldest step yet. I contacted a local journalist known for exposing corruption and financial crimes. I didn't explain everything over the phone, just enough to spark interest. By the time George glanced up from his screen, I had sent a secure link containing the files. I watched him closely as he noticed the unusual email notification on my account. "David, what's this?" he asked casually, trying to mask the fear creeping into his tone. I kept my expression neutral. "Just some financial reports. Thought you'd like to see them." George's brow furrowed. His fingers trembled slightly as he clicked the link. Instantly, the numbers, transfers, and forged signatures were laid bare on the screen. He leaned back, eyes wide, a cold realization dawning. He hadn't anticipated that I had both the patience and the proof to hit him where it hurt most. Isabella returned shortly after, her cheerful voice breaking the tense silence. She approached, phone in hand, ready to brag about her new purchase. That's when she saw George's face. Confusion, disbelief, and panic all at once. What did you do?" she stammered. George's voice cracked, though he tried to maintain composure. "David, It's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I said calmly. "Every transaction, every forged signature, every plan to steal my house and siphon my money. $50,000 transferred without my knowledge. And yes, it's all documented." The room fell into an unbearable silence. For the first time in weeks, they were the ones unsure, panicked, and exposed. Every smirk, every lie, every confident glance they had shared in my absence vanished. They were stripped of control, and I had taken it quietly, surgically, but I didn't stop there. I ensured the journalist had everything needed to report the case as soon as possible. Within hours, the files would reach authorities and public channels. The betrayal was no longer just a private pain, it was a legal and social reckoning. George's face turned pale. He realized that the comfortable empire he thought he had built on lies was crumbling. Isabella, equally shocked, looked at me as if seeing her father for the first time in weeks. She hadn't expected strategy. She had expected confrontation or silence. She hadn't anticipated patience, preparation, and a man scorned. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady, voice calm. "You assumed I was weak. You assumed silence meant surrender. But you were wrong, very wrong. The first move is mine, and it's just the beginning." By nightfall, I knew the aftermath would begin. George and Isabella would start questioning each other, second-guessing every step, every plan. Their alliance would fracture under the weight of exposure. And the house, the bank accounts, the proof of $50,000 theft, all of it, would give me leverage they could never recover from. That night, I walked past the roses in the backyard, brushing my fingers over the petals. I whispered to the memory of my wife, "This is for us. For everything we built, everything they tried to steal. Justice is coming." For the first time in weeks, I slept without dread. Not because the battle was over, but because the first move had been made and the tide was finally turning. The house might still look like theirs. The smiles might still be in place, but the balance of power had shifted. And George and Isabella would soon learn that a father's patience, when coupled with strategy and proof, can be more devastating than any anger or shouting ever could. The morning sun barely touched the horizon, yet I was already awake, eyes scanning the evidence spread across the dining table. Every detail mattered, every transaction, every forged signature, every whispered plan. The $50,000 transfer was no longer just a number. It was a weapon, and today it would be used with precision. George and Isabella still believed they controlled the narrative, that the house and the money were theirs to manipulate. They had no idea I had transformed observation into strategy, patience into action. My first move had shaken them, but now the real work began. By late morning, George called me, voice tight, attempting casual conversation. "David, about the documents you sent." I interrupted, calm and deliberate. "George, there's no about. The evidence speaks for itself. Every transaction, every forged contract, it's all here. $50,000 taken from our account, unaccounted for. And now it's being reviewed by authorities and the journalist." His confidence faltered. "David, please, I can explain." "No explanations," I said firmly. "Actions have consequences, and you've already proven what kind of man you are." I could hear him pause, his smooth facade cracking. Isabella, lurking in the background, realized too late that the tide had turned. Her eyes met mine, wide with panic and regret, though no words came. That afternoon, I made my next calculated move. I contacted the real estate agent George had been communicating with. I didn't confront, I didn't argue. I simply ensured all listing inquiries would be met with a red flag, pending legal review due to fraudulent documents. Overnight, the potential buyers disappeared. Their dream of a quick sale crumbled. By evening, the tension in the house was palpable. George paced, muttering about missed opportunities and unexplained obstacles. Isabella retreated to her room, phone clutched tightly, trying to convince herself that nothing could touch her. I stayed calm, watching quietly, every gesture and glance catalogued, but the most important step was yet to come. I needed to secure my own position. I transferred the $50,000 back into a separate, secure account I controlled, one that neither George nor Isabella could access. The theft was now undone, but more importantly, it became undeniable proof of their greed and betrayal. That night, the house was eerily silent. I walked past the roses in the backyard, brushing my fingers over the petals, whispering my wife's name. The anger, the heartbreak, the months of planning, all had condensed into a single quiet determination. Then the first real sign of escalation came. George, in a desperate bid, tried to access the secure account. He failed. He tried subtle manipulation, hinting at threats and legal loopholes. I documented every attempt, recording the frustration, the panic, and the realization that he had underestimated me completely. Isabella finally approached me that evening, her voice trembling. "Dad, please, can't we just fix this?" I looked at her calmly, eyes steady. "Isabella, fixing this means acknowledging what you did. You tried to steal from me. You tried to betray me. And now the world knows it too. $50,000 is gone from your grasp, but your choices remain exposed." Her face fell. George slammed a drawer shut, muttering under his breath, fully aware that their carefully plotted control was unraveling. The first strike had been mine, but the second, the real test, would be the complete dismantling of their confidence and plans. As I finally sat down, the quiet settled over the house like a prelude to a storm. I wasn't done, far from it. Every move they made would now be countered. Every attempt at deception would be met with precision. Revenge was no longer an abstract idea. It was a tangible, unstoppable force. And in that moment, I understood fully. Betrayal, once sown, can never be ignored. But justice, when wielded with patience, planning, and proof, justice cuts deeper than any knife. Tomorrow, the final pieces would fall into place. George and Isabella would face the consequences of their greed, their lies, and their betrayal. The house, the money, the trust, everything they thought they controlled, would finally return to its rightful owner. The house felt suffocating that evening, every shadow stretching longer than before. George had stopped pacing. Isabella hadn't left her room for hours. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every creak of the floorboard sound like a threat. I watched silently from the kitchen, my notebook in hand, my phone recording, and my mind rehearsing the next steps. Their confidence had crumbled, but their desperation was growing. I could see it in George's eyes, the faint twitch in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the edge of the table. Isabella's usual sly grin was gone, replaced with uncertainty and guilt. The $50,000 transfer had been undone, their illegal plans exposed, and yet they still hoped to maneuver out of the consequences. It was time. I called George to the living room, keeping my voice calm but firm. "We need to talk. Both of you." George hesitated but followed. Isabella lingered behind, peeking out nervously. I gestured for her to come closer. Every step, every expression was now a part of the record, a living testament to their betrayal. I placed the stack of evidence on the coffee table, contracts, bank statements, screenshots, recordings. "This," I said slowly, "is everything. Every attempt to steal my home, every fraudulent transfer, every plan you made behind my back. Even the $50,000 you siphoned quietly. All of it." George's face went pale. He tried to speak, but no words came. Isabella's lips trembled, guilt written across her features. No, I interrupted. "Save it. This isn't about apologies. This is about truth. And the truth is that both of you tried to take from me what I worked my entire life for." I leaned in closer, my voice quiet but sharp. "You underestimated me. You thought silence meant weakness. You thought patience meant surrender. But I have been watching, listening, documenting. And now the tables have turned." George stammered. "David, please, I shook my head. "No more lies. Not tonight." I placed the copies of documents in front of them. "You have two choices. Face the consequences of your actions legally and publicly, or continue hiding and see how far this evidence can go. The $50,000 is gone from your hands, Isabella. George, the transfers are documented. You can't deny it." Isabella's voice cracked. "Dad, I didn't mean to." "You didn't just mean to," I said softly but firmly. "You acted. You plotted. You betrayed. And now the world knows it too. Every move you made, every plan you had, it is all recorded, and it will be shared." George finally sank into a chair, defeated, realizing the scope of his downfall. Isabella, tears streaming, looked at me as if seeing me truly for the first time in years. I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry isn't enough," I replied. "You took more than just money. You took trust. You took the peace of this home. You thought you could manipulate me, deceive me, steal from me. But justice doesn't sleep. Justice doesn't forget. And revenge can be precise, patient, and final." I sat back, watching the realization settle on their faces. The power dynamics had shifted completely. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was the orchestrator of the reckoning. The house, the money, the proof, all under my control. The betrayal had led to their exposure, and their fear was the first step toward true justice. Then, as if to punctuate the moment, I called the journalist once more, confirming the files were ready for submission. George looked at me wide-eyed. "You wouldn't." "I would," I said calmly, "because the law, evidence, and truth are on my side. And because patience has its rewards." Isabella's shoulders slumped. George buried his face in his hands. For the first time in weeks, they understood the magnitude of their miscalculation. The $50,000 theft and the plot to steal the house were now both exposed and inescapable. That night I walked through the empty hallways, touching the furniture, feeling the familiar textures, inhaling the scent of home, roses, wood polish, the lingering memory of my wife. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also led to clarity. Vigilance, patience, and preparation could defeat even the closest of enemies. Tomorrow the world would witness the consequences. The final steps of exposure and legal action would cement the justice that had been long overdue. George and Isabella would face what they had wrought, a reckoning for their greed, lies, and betrayal. And as I closed my eyes that night, for the first time in months, I felt the quiet satisfaction of a storm prepared, a plan executed, and the first threads of revenge firmly in motion. The house, the money, and my peace of mind would not just be restored. They would serve as a reminder. Betrayal cuts deepest, but justice can cut sharper. The morning light filtered through the blinds, gentle and almost peaceful. But inside, the storm had already passed. George and Isabella sat quietly, the weight of their betrayal and exposure pressing down on them. The $50,000 transfer, the forged documents, the schemes to steal my house, every deceit now laid bare. They had been stripped of the illusions of control they once held so dearly. I took a slow breath, feeling the tension that had haunted me for months finally begin to lift. Justice had been meticulous, patient, and precise. My plan had not relied on anger, shouting, or rash moves. Instead, it had been observation, evidence, and strategy. "You understand now," I said softly, addressing both of them, "that trust isn't given lightly, and betrayal carries consequences." George avoided my gaze, eyes downcast. Isabella's hands trembled as she fiddled with her phone. We understand," she murmured. "Yes," I replied, "and this is your chance to make amends. Not through words, but through actions. You cannot undo the past, but you can choose integrity moving forward." The lawyer and authorities arrived later that day to formalize the evidence. Every transaction, every forged signature, and every plan was now under legal review. The journalist confirmed that the files had been secured for publication, ensuring public accountability. George and Isabella had no room to maneuver. The $50,000 theft had been recovered, and their attempt to manipulate the house sale was nullified. Standing in my living room, I felt the familiar textures of home, the furniture, the photos, the roses I had planted with my wife's memory. It was mine again, not just legally but spiritually. The betrayal had been bitter, but the victory was sweeter because it was deliberate, calculated, and undeniable. I looked at them one last time. "Remember this," I said calmly. "Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family. But justice, patience, and proof cut sharper." George and Isabella remained silent, absorbing the weight of my words. For months they had believed they could manipulate me, but they had underestimated one thing: a father's love for his home, his memories, and the principles he held. As the day ended, I stepped outside to the backyard. The roses swayed gently in the evening breeze. I whispered my wife's name, a quiet acknowledgement of her presence and the life we had built. I had been tested, deceived, and nearly broken, but I had endured, acted, and reclaimed what was mine. And now, the story is ready to be told, to remind anyone watching that betrayal. Greed and deceit may strike from the closest hearts, but courage, patience, and careful planning can restore balance, justice, and dignity. Thank you for watching this episode of Revenge Stories, where we dive deep into tales of betrayal, deceit, and justice served. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another shocking story. Comment below. Have you ever experienced betrayal in your life? How did you overcome it? We read every comment and love hearing from you. Stay tuned for more true-to-life revenge stories that prove one thing: betrayal hurts, but revenge, when executed with precision, hits harder. Remember, subscribe to Revenge Stories for the most gripping, true-life accounts of deception, justice, and payback.